why is it so difficult to negotiate with a narcissist? So I'm going to turn to you, just ask that to you as a question, because I know I got my answer. Why is it so difficult to negotiate with a narcissist from an attorney's perspective?
Well, okay, so what I'm going to tell you is that most people think that they're so difficult because they want to win. And so, you know, they're going to do whatever they can to win, which is true. They are going to do whatever they can to win. However, that is not actually what they want. What they really want is to manipulate you. So they constantly are moving the target. So even if they give you 3 choices of things that they say that they'll settle for, and you pick one, well, now it's changed. Because they are, the goal is to manipulate you. The goal is to make it as difficult for you as possible.
So maybe that is the win, though. I think that, I think your initial premise that they want to win, I think for them, winning is manipulating.
Well, that's my point.
Because they're still playing with your head. But it's not winning the way a
rational person
thinks.
Yes,
not the way a rational person thinks.
Because a rational person thinks, well, if I give them everything they're asking for, then they've won, so they should be happy.
Right.
But that's not what they want. So you have to understand that what their real goal is to manipulate you, because then they maintain a sense of control over you.
So what's interesting about that, though, is that this idea, because you said something interesting, that if you give the narcissist everything they want, then they'll be happy, and this will go smoothly. My guess is that, and you'll know this better than I because you're in the actual legal setting with them, that a lot of people who enter into negotiations with narcissists they're conflict averse. They don't want to fight.
100%.
They don't like, so to them, they've been forever trying to deal with this elusive target of the narcissist's happiness. One thing I really try to impart on the clients I work with is there's no such thing as a happy narcissist.
No, but you know what happens is, as you know, they start off this relationship with this whole love bomb phase, and so they spend the rest of their relationship trying to find that space again, because they once loved them. They used to be so great to them. They used to be so wonderful. So if I'm just good enough, if I just do what they want, then I'll be able to find that again. But you know, every single person who comes through the doors of my office says, I don't want to fight. Every single one. Every single one says, I don't want to fight, I don't want to spend a lot of money.
So here's my question. Do you ever get the narcissistic clients?
Oh, all the time.
So, okay, so they're not going to come in and say, I don't want to fight.
No, they do say, I don't want to fight.
Really?
Oh, yeah. But they say, we're pretty much agreed on everything. You know, they think that they've already talked their victim into an agreement. So they think it's going to be easy. And of course, they still treat the attorney like they treat everybody else. So this isn't going to cost a lot of money. So you don't need to spend a lot of time on this. So, you know, I'll just bring the agreement to you and you'll just draft it up and it's not going to cost a whole lot of money.
Have you ever had a case in negotiating a divorce where somebody has come in and said, I am looking for a fight? I'm going to punish this, you know what, or
every once in a while, but it's more like the spurned person, you know, like the person, and it's not that they say that I'm looking for a fight. It's more, I deserve this.
All right.
They spin it differently than that. It's more like he should pay because he cheated on me because we were supposed to stay married the entire time or whatever. I call that the difference between divorce law and divorce justice, because divorce justice doesn't actually exist.
That. Yeah, well, and it's a common trope we hear is the pit bull attorney. Hire me a pit bull. I need me a pit bull. Somebody who walks into a lawyer's office and says, I want a pit bull, is looking for a fight.
Well, I think in their mind, though, they're looking to protect themselves.
Well, okay, excellent. That's a great distinction. Okay, great. Yeah. Even though ultimately they are actually looking for a fight.
You know, and I've had people say, I'm hiring you because you're a pit bull, and I'm always thinking, that's really interesting because I think I'm just trying to be fair for my client or advocate for my client.
Right.
But when you're dealing with a narcissist, and going back to the question of why it's so difficult to deal with a narcissist, when you get into that litigation setting, because remember, you're dealing with the most scared, the most insecure personality type there is. Even though they put on this great big show, they actually have zero self-esteem. So they get all of their value from the external, and as you know, the supply. And so when they get into this litigation setting, they can't allow themselves to look bad. And now they've got this person who knows stuff about them,
Right.
who has the ability to make them look bad by exposing them on some way.
That's exactly right.
And so what they do is they go on the offensive right away. Triangulation, trying to get everybody against them, lying, manipulating everything the other person says. It doesn't matter what they say.
Right.
It gets manipulated. So that's partially why it's extremely difficult when you get in that setting, because they go into survival mode.
The narcissist or
The
or the
narcissist
person?
does.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would actually argue both people are going
Well,
to
both of
survival
them
mode.
do.
Like everyone's got, especially the victim, for lack of a better word, might have their hands up against their face, like to try to protect themselves, which is something they've been sort of quietly doing for the duration of a relationship. Would you say, though, then, because we're calling this negotiating with a narcissist, and obviously many of you I know who are watching are going through a divorce, but would you say these kinds of negotiation techniques would apply in other situations, a workplace setting or any of these?
Anytime you're dealing with a high conflict personality, anytime you're dealing with a narcissist, even if they're not technically, a narcissist, if they have a high conflict personality, if they have a personality where they want to have control, where they're easily slighted, where they all of the personality traits of a narcissist, it's the same kind of thing that you're going to be dealing with, and so you can't go at it like a rational person. Rational people say, well, let's just find some middle ground and we can settle and we can have an agreement. That will never happen when you're dealing with a narcissist.
I would also imagine, and one of the tricky bits in narcissistic divorce, I see this all the time with my clients, is that a person has been hurt by the narcissist infidelity, the narcissist lying, the narcissist level of severe, almost coercive control, okay? We live in a country where most states in the United States have what are called no-fault divorces, which means that there's no attribution of blame that has anything to do with how resources are divvied up. So in other words, it's not like you get a bonus because your partner cheated on you. Like, it doesn't matter why the relationship ended, it ended. And I think in the world of the no-fault divorce, the narcissistic divorce is even more painful for people because there was so much due cause, right? Like, they're like, are you kidding me? This person gets 50% of my stuff and they cheated on me with 15 different people and this and that. And as the attorney, you must have to say, yep.
Well, it depends.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yes. So I just want to dispel a myth. And the myth is that no fault means that fault never matters.
Okay, great. That's an important point to clarify.
Yes, so no fault only means that you don't have to prove fault in order to get a divorce.
Okay.
So for years and years and years, you couldn't get divorced unless you proved that a person cheated on you or proved that a person abandoned you or something.
Okay.
No fault just means that you don't have to prove fault.
You can just say, I'm done.
You can just say it's irretrievably broken or whatever you say, in which, each state has their own nomenclature.
Right.
But it doesn't mean fault never matters.
Okay.
Because fault can matter. In fact, in Florida, in the alimony statute, it actually says that infidelity can be taken into consideration. Now, I've never seen a judge say, I'm ordering more alimony because the person cheated. But judges are people too, and so if you shock the judicial conscience in such a way where you're so bad and you've treated the person so horribly, they will take that into consideration.
That's very interesting.
And they can take it, and certainly they can take it into consideration when it comes to splitting assets, because if somebody has spent a lot of money on a paramour of some sort, and I've seen the worst situations. I mean, I saw a guy who had a relationship with a woman for years and years. He bought her a house. They had a child together. He was sending the child to private school, all kinds of things and the wife never knew that this woman existed. And so, hundreds of thousands of dollars of marital money went into this person. And so the wife was entitled to half of that, what we call marital waste or dissipation.
Oh, interesting.
So,
okay.
So it's
that's important to know.
Yes.
That's really important to know.
It's not that fault never matters.
Okay. It can matter.
It can matter.
But you are a bit at the mercy of the court.
It is. I mean, you start with the premise of 50-50 in most states. And, some states call it equitable distribution. Some states call it community property. But it's kind of basically the same, where you have a marital pot, you have a non-marital pot. I mean, there's a his, hers, and theirs is what I call it. But It's not that it never matters. It can matter.
It can matter.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that one thing while assets matter, and they matter a lot for people, because many times people are saying, listen, I've worked with a lot of people who are the non-wage earning partner in the relationship, men or women, and they may have lost years in the workforce, right? So they're not going to be able to make as much money. So, you know, equitable division of assets matters, but narcissists are tricky. Right, so they're very clever.
They hide money.
Yeah, they hide money, and forensic
100%.
accounting is expensive, and all of that.
Yep.
But when it comes down to brass tacks, all things being equal, as long as people can pay the rent, the bigger issue becomes custody. And I guess that's something we're going to get to,
We
you
are.
know, and talk about, because I know that a lot of the people who are watching that, when it comes down to it, they'll say, you know what, I'd be happy to give it all up if I could get full custody. My understanding, and this is where your clarification would be great, that's not permissible to say, I won't take a cent, but I want the kids.
Well, child support is a right of the child.
Right.
It's a vested right of the child. It's actually in trust for the child in some ways, even though it doesn't go into a trust. You know, and actually child support is an interesting thing too, because the way child support actually works is, it seems like one is paying the other. But what's really happening is that if you look at the child support statutes, if you ever get a copy of the statute book, you will see the way it looks is that there's one number for that child. So if the parents' combined income is X per month, then this is how much they should be spending on this child. You know, and they take a lot of things into consideration. They, you know, whatever the value is of putting a roof over the kid's head, or feeding this kid, or whatever the average is for that. And so they come up with a number that child should have spent on him based on these parents' combined incomes. And so, and then they you know, if there's a disparity in incomes, then that disparity is what gets paid to the other parent.
Okay. But there's going to be a disparity in income many, many times.
Of course.
Especially when you have a wage earning and a non-wage earning situation. So when we get out of the sort of the finer legal points, what people will say is that, you know, usually it's the narcissistic parent is saying, why the hell should I give her that much money? You just said it's not giving her anything, it's for the child. They're not going to see it that way.
No.
As far as they're concerned, you can say all the legal statutes, you know, till the cows come home, this is going to the child. That narcissistic parent sees that money going to that parent who makes less money or no money
100%.
to take care of that child.
100%.
Okay? So going back to, again, to that original question, that while child support is for the child, I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with who said, can't I go to the court? And because the argument is becoming, the narcissist is like, I don't want to give him or her anything.
Because the court doesn't want children to become wards of the state.
That's right. I understood. But you see,
so they won't allow anybody to give up child support.
So then where that was, that's the interesting conundrum that the victim, as you will, the other partner who's not narcissistic or parent gets into, is that they're like, I just don't want my kids to be raised by this person. This person is toxic. They might be dangerous, but we know that that level of dangerousness that has to be established.
What you're getting into, though, is leverage.
Okay, and that's what we're going to get to. Interesting.
Yeah, because you know that's a point of leverage. You know, saying I'll give up child support, that's something that you don't want to give in on right away, because you want to get other things first. I mean, there are ways that you can get around the whole child support thing, which we'll get into in our episode. But that is a piece of leverage that you don't want to give away. And don't give away your leverage too early, people, please.
You know, those of you who have watched my videos know that I've talked ad nauseum and read my books. It's all about the different types of narcissism and how they manifest. It does seem like there's going to be some similarities and differences on the basis of the type of narcissist we're dealing with. Something I've always wanted to bring home to everyone is the type of narcissist someone is often has a lot to do with the kind of day they're having. And by that I mean, any narcissist who's having a good run of it, they're making a lot of money, they got the stuff they want, they're getting the people they want, most importantly, they're getting the validation and the supply they want, more often than not are going to present as grandiose narcissists. Life's going their way. And so, but some people just tend to be more of the grandiose narcissistic type, and that's their baseline, okay? We know that in general, people who are narcissistic have empathy deficits, they're deeply entitled. The grandiose narcissists are obviously quite grandiose. They're arrogant, they have a propensity for rage, they do not regulate disappointment well, they're chronically seeking admiration, they're seeking validation, they are superficial, and they have not only difficulty regulating their emotions, but they're also incredibly sensitive in the face of criticism. They can dish it out, but they can't take it. The presentation of the grandiose narcissist then becomes someone who really is sort of like that person, that kind of, it can feel sleazy salesman-like, it can be like I am the king of the world-like, it can be I've got all the answers, it can be annoying guy on the bar stool, or annoying gal on the bar stool. All of that said, what are the leading tips you have with, especially in a divorce setting, of how to negotiate with a grandiose narcissist?
Well, so the grandiose narcissist is going to do everything they can to keep control of the situation. So the first thing they're going to try to do is try to get rid of your lawyer in some way, because your lawyer is the person who is now between the narcissist and the person who they want to control. And the lawyer now becomes the enemy, because that's the person who's going to actually maybe expose the narcissist for who or what they are, or maybe be between them and them getting the deal that they want or that they think that they should have. And so they're going to try to get the person to meet at Starbucks. Let's just meet at Starbucks. You know, we don't need lawyers. You know, so that's the thing that they're going to do.
Okay.
And they're going to say your lawyer is just after the money. I've heard that, you know, he or she, whatever it is that they can possibly dream up and say, that's what they're going to say, because they want you to get rid of the lawyer. So this is what I tell people all the time is, you have three choices. You can stay with this person and stay married to them, which I don't recommend.
But I've got, you know me, y'all can read my book, and I got a whole bunch of videos telling you how to stay if you need to stay, because some people have to stay.
Well, I don't recommend in the long run. I mean, if you have to stay for kids or you have reasons or whatever, but in the long run, you probably want to work this person out of your life. Number two is to take exactly what they want you to take with your pat on the head and walk away. But we already talked about that. Even if you choose door number two, it's going to be a shifting thing. It's never going to be exactly, because if they think that you're just taking what they're offering, then they're like, well, maybe I should offer less or whatever, because they just want to mess around with you. And then door number three is, you know, you're going to have to fight up against this person. So, you know, don't have those meetings alone, because you know that this person manipulates you. You know the person's a liar. You know that this person is going to say and do whatever they can to get what they want or to manipulate you. So don't do it. Don't have those conversations. And what I recommend for people to do in those situations is just say, I don't know, I'm just talking to my lawyer. Blame it all on your lawyer. Let your lawyer be the fall person. You know, I don't know, I just want what's fair. I just want, you know, what my rights are, and I'm going to let the lawyer sort it out. That's what I suggest that people do.
So it's, I mean, in all of my work, working with individuals who are experiencing narcissistic abuse or in narcissistic relationships, my consistent, you know, don't move away from a position is realistic expectations and radical acceptance. This person, to the point you're now getting a divorce, things have gotten so toxic. And I have to say, in narcissistic relationships, people let things get a lot more toxic than they would in another relationship where they simply grown apart from someone, because you've become so mentally confused. And with a grandiose narcissist, you're so used to being lorded over, you're so confused by the gaslighting. You know, people are, and the grandiose narcissist plays that game really, really well, and you're burned out. So that idea of a Starbucks meeting is like, okay, fine, you're so exhausted. But then I say, realistic expectations, radical acceptance. This is a person who manipulates. It's who they are, it's what they do. It's just like a scorpion stings. a narcissist manipulates, and to have realistic expectations that all of a sudden, now that you filed for divorce, now they're going to become an angel. It's not how it's going to go down.
Oh, in fact, it's the opposite, because you no longer have value to that narcissist. In fact, you're a liability, because as long as you were still in that narcissist world and they thought that maybe you were for them in some way, or you have some value to them, then they're sort of measured a little bit more. But once you no longer have value, you are now the enemy. And so it is on. And they, you know, I think in a subsequent video, we're going to talk more about all the different kinds of things that they do in a divorce setting. But, you know, once you no longer have value to a narcissist, you are the enemy.
Yeah, and I also have to say, too, though, with a grandiose narcissist, what people do need to be prepared for psychologically is it's not over, like, they're not just going to start fight. They're actually going to try love bomb sequence 2, love bomb sequence 3, because in some ways it's not that they want you back. They may. A lot of times grandiose narcissists care deeply about what they look like to the world. They want to look like the Christmas card. They want to be the happy family. They have a whole narrative around, I just want to be the happy family. This matters to me. And you know, it's a whole shtick that they're selling to the world. So they want to keep that back, but it's also a game. It's, can I lure the rat out of its hole? Can I bring this person back out? It's what it was from the jump. That's what love bombing is. So I know how to call that bluff right away. Which is?
Get them to sign a post-nup right now. Okay, you want me back? I'll come back. Sign a post-nuptial agreement.
That's great. Perfect. Now we know how they're typically going to react.
Of course, they're not going to say yes.
No, they're not going to.
So now you've called their bluff.
That's right. And they play on that vulnerability, and they say, really, a post-nup. So this really was just about money. And that's when the other person, the non-narcissistic person, who's already been so beaten down by this, who's already vulnerable to this, who already has issues around self-doubt, confusion, all the things that happen in narcissistic abuse, says, no, this wasn't about money, and they find themselves getting into the thickets and can often get pulled in. They want to seem noble. No, this was never about money. This was about you treating me with respect. And then I've seen many people at that point get sucked right back in with the grandiose narcissist.
You know what I say to that? What's wrong with it being about money? If you're entitled to it.
Right. And there's the difference between the lawyer and the psychologist.
If you're entitled to it, if the law provides that you're entitled to it, then don't be embarrassed about asking for what the law is providing for you.
But here, this is where I will take a slightly different stance as a psychologist. I think what a lot of people say is that, yes, it's about money. This is a marriage. Marriage is really a contract. Marriage really is a contract. Stop romanticizing it. It's a contract. But marriage is a contract that they are entitled to it. But I do think that people who have been in long-term relationships with grandiose narcissists, it is really about, can you please reflect on what you just did to me for the last 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years? You know what? They'd say, I'd walk away from $10 million.
I have the best story for you with that. The best story. So I was representing a guy who was number 2 in the largest development company in Florida. And, you know, he was one of these narcissistic personality types who came in and, you know, any room in your retainer and whatever. And I was like, no, but, you know, if you want to go on down the road, fine. But so I didn't, but he was trying to get me to reduce my retainer. So we get to mediation, and it's like 9 o'clock at night, and we're all settled on everything, and he's agreed to pay her around $250,000 a year in alimony and he was like 55 years old. So just for easy math, you know, it's at least for the next 10 years, because when you retire at 65, you could potentially ask for a modification. But so we're talking about $2.5 million. Okay. We're getting ready to sign. Mediator comes into my office and says, or to the conference room where I was with my client, and says, I need to talk to you. I have a very unusual request, but I want to run it past you before I run it past your client. So he pulls me aside and says, the wife says that she will waive alimony, waive $2.5 million, if he apologizes to her for how he treated her during the marriage. And guess what? He didn't want to do it.
And there it is. See? So I'm telling all of you, there it is. You know? So
I made him.
Yeah.
I'm like, yes, you will. Get over there. And so he went over there and apologized, and she waived alimony, and that was that. But that was worth more to her.
Right.
And she knew also that he wouldn't want to do it.
Right, and so here's where it's, again, as I'm going to put the psychologist hat on here, which is, there is something unsatisfying about that. He didn't want to apologize. It wasn't a real apology. And one thing we do know in the world of narcissism is a narcissist apology is it's worthless. It's less than worthless. It's the gum on your shoe because it's manufactured. It's somebody saying, just for $2.5 million, say sorry. That's not an apology. That's a,
From my perspective as his attorney, I'm like,
right.
All day long.
Exactly.
As her attorney, I'd have been like, you're not asking for that. No way.
Right. And as her psychologist, I say you just bought yourself another 10 years of healing because that wasn't an apology. I think that the struggle becomes, and again, this is where it's interesting to have the lawyer talk to psychologists, is that when the apology feels not authentic, the person says, what was that? And I'll say it was nothing. It was, it was window dressing. It's very difficult for a narcissistic individual to apologize because of the shame factor, because of the insecurity factor, because of the lack of capacity for them to exercise empathy, right? What he does, that client of yours, he doesn't believe he caused her pain.
Right.
He doesn't. He just wanted his money.
Right.
Okay? She was in pain and the other person didn't acknowledge it. It's looking into the mirror that doesn't look back. And that's there, to wit, is the conundrum where I might say, okay, if I would tell somebody, get the money, then at least you can get the therapy. Because,
exactly.
that's,
I mean, hey, from my perspective as his lawyer, my job was to advocate for him.
Right.
So it wasn't my job to say no to that.
Right.
It was my job to say, get your butt in there and apologize.
Right. Yes.
I mean, because that's the kind of thing that he would have come back to me on later and said, why didn't you make me?
That's right. And exactly, and blame you. But my job is to tell that woman, you didn't get a real apology. What can we learn from this relationship?
I'm sure she probably regretted it.
Maybe who knows what her financial situation was, maybe who knows what I don't know her mindset is, but at the end of the day I would have said, how do we help you learn from this so you never pick someone like this again? That's really what it is.
Because
how do we learn from this? People do pick. So, just as a twist here, because we do talk about, while the grandiose narcissist is the most common, the one we see the most, there are these other subtypes, what we often call the covert or vulnerable narcissists. This is what I often view as the more victimized narcissist. When you meet them, they're often a little bit more sad, they're softer, they're not as in your face. In fact, a lot of people want to rescue covert narcissists. They're like, if this person just got a break, they'd be fine. What they don't realize is right under the surface is this tremendous amount of contempt.
Yes.
Contempt for other people, contempt that other people have it easier, contempt that life didn't go on, jealousy and envy and all of these kinds of emotions. And the insecurity in the covert / vulnerable narcissist is much greater.
Yes.
Would you say then, are there any other unique elements of negotiation then that come up with covert narcissists?
Well, so they're not going to be as in your face, and it's not going to be as obvious to the divorce lawyers or to the judge. So the judge might say, oh, this poor person, and fool everybody. And especially because the covert narcissist tends to be more passive aggressive. And so it's easier to explain away the things that they will do, so they might, inadvertently send an email to somebody, oh, oops, it was an accident. And you know that it wasn't an accident because you've been living with this person for years. So they're much more adept at hiding the kinds of things that they're doing. So in my opinion, they're actually more toxic in a lot of ways.
Can be, yeah, absolutely.
Because it's going to be harder to get the system and the people in the system to understand the personality type that you're dealing with. If you're having a parental evaluation or a custody evaluation done, they may fool that psychologist.
Absolutely.
Because they're going to say, oh, I'm such a victim, and this other person was so horrible to me, and I can never catch a break, and I want to work, but I'm so sick all the time, and I always feel terrible. And and so they're actually much more difficult in the divorce setting, and they'll still do the same kinds of things. This triangulation is a biggie with covert narcissists. Let's get the whole world on my my side. Let's get everybody to see how much of a victim I am and how horrible this other person is. And they're actually very good at getting the person.
Yes, they are.
Getting people to believe them.
And leaving the person who has been victimized by them looking like a bad guy.
Right.
You know, this person actually has been enduring so much when you've been in a relationship with a covert narcissist, and everyone's like, why are you being so hard on him or her? You know, what, well, come on, like cut. And there's a lot of gaslighting by other people that happens in these relationships where, especially when it's careening towards a divorce. So it's definitely a very, very toxic dynamic. So when a person is in a divorce or in any form of negotiation with a covert narcissist, then what?
Well, it's the same kind of thing. You're going to have the same sort of thing. I mean, they're going to probably obstruct you. They're, you know, they're not going to give over information. You know, they're going to put up roadblocks at every chance that they can. They're going to manipulate everything that you say, but they're just going to do it in a way that's more under the radar and harder for you to bring to people's attention, because when you bring what they're doing to people's attention, it's the kind of thing where people go, well, that's not that bad. Or that was probably just a mistake.
Yes, exactly. Gaslighting.
Yes, exactly. So, you know, whereas an overt narcissist or the grandiose narcissist,
you can see it.
It's much more manipulative. You can actually see it right in the email chain. It's easier to follow the email chain and go, well, okay, here you go.
Would you argue maybe it's a different form of manipulation? Because I think passive aggressiveness is at its core manipulation, right?
100%.
It's the attempt of, maybe it's not even an active attempt, but it is the induction of negative emotion in another person, typically guilt, to mobilize action on their part, not because the other person wants to do something, but they're doing it to stave off this sense of guilt.
And it's absolutely just as traumatic for the victim.
Yes. Yeah,
100%.
manipulation's manipulation. I mean, I don't care if it's in your face, I don't care it's through a passive-aggressive back door, it definitely leaves people sort of reeling. So this takes us then to one last form of narcissism I want to get to, because I think it's worth mentioning because it's more dangerous, which is malignant narcissism. There are researchers out there that view malignant narcissism as sort of like that space in the middle where more of a grandiose narcissistic style meets like a low-grade psychopathy, meets this sort of really Machiavellian, manipulative, political, like, you know, very skilled, working other people's style. Malignant narcissists are where we're going to see your CEO types, we're going to see your world leader types, we're going to see people at the top who are able to charm you, then go chew someone else out, then go destroy someone else's life, and then go charm someone else. Like their ability to just sort of do that leaves everyone confused, and they've usually charmed the right people, including people like judges. They're that good. Whereas the covert narcissist ain't charming anyone. You know, even the grandiose narcissist gets a little bit nervous during a divorce. A malignant narcissist is very cool under stress.
Yeah, it's harder to get them unglued.
Yes, it is. It is, and they can be dangerous. I mean, we have been talking about, you know, negotiating a divorce thus far from a perspective of, you know, not from a violence perspective. Now remember, abuse in a relationship can take many forms. The majority of clients I work with are dealing with severe psychological abuse, which to me is every bit, perhaps even more traumatic than physical abuse. And it also
100%.
includes things like stalking, coercive control, financial
no
abuse.
boundaries.
Yeah, so all that things, the financial, the control, all of it, it is like it's a disease that overtakes the person, and they realize they're literally living in a prison when they're in a relationship with a malignant narcissist. It can escalate to danger, and in the cases I've consulted on where a person's divorcing a malignant narcissist, we have to come up with a safety plan. And that's where I've worked with people who have expertise in domestic violence on having a go bag, and how do you set that up, and how do you, I mean, we're teaching people to clear out the search histories on computers and stuff. I mean, in the electronic age, in some
and
ways,
also save the things that they need to save.
Save what you need to save. Clear out what you don't want to do. Go to libraries,
Change
use
your
other
passwords.
computers,
I
change
tell
your
people
passwords.
that all the time.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, this is a different territory. So any other thoughts when you're negotiating with someone who, if not full on dangerous, like going to really do physical harm to you, is always menacing? They send that menacing email. There's something almost stalky about them. It doesn't relent. Emails at 3 in the morning. I mean, these are the clients I work with who are the most wrecked. I mean, they are in a post-traumatic stress state almost all of the time.
Yeah. And they have no boundaries. So, I mean, they'll just show up at your house. They'll do whatever they need to do, whatever they want to do. So, first of all, let me just say, and I tell my clients this all the time, if you feel that you are in danger, please call the police. You know, don't call your lawyer. Your lawyer can't do anything right away. So, you know, a lot of times I hear people saying, how is he or she getting away with this? And it's a very common thing. And so let me just inject reality into that statement really briefly. And that is that there are no divorce fairies that linger around people's houses and come jumping out of the wall when somebody misbehaves.
Exactly right.
So how are they getting away with this? Remember, the only person that has any power over anyone else in our society is the judge. That is it. There's law enforcement if you break the law. If you do something criminal, you can call the police. Other than that, it's the judge. Those are the only avenues of getting someone to behave. That's it. So when you're dealing with somebody who is menacing and maybe unsafe or stalking, then you have to call the police, because most states, in order to get any kind of an injunction, so if you want to get some kind of injunction against the person, or I guess in regular word terms it's a restraining order or something like that, you have to be able to show that you're in danger. You have to be able to show, you can't just say, I'm scared of this person, because this person has civil rights, they have constitutional rights, they have to have notice and opportunity to be heard and all of that sort of thing. And so call the police if you think that you're in danger. It will only help you get that restraining order down the road if you decide that that's what you want. The worst possible thing that you can do is go try to get a restraining order and then it doesn't stick, because now the person feels empowered. So you have to be really, really careful about making sure that if you're going to go that route, that it's going to stick and you're going to get it.
But also, let's warn people that once you get a restraining order, the likelihood of violence skyrockets.
Well, because they're
yes, but that's the reality check. I don't want people to think restraining orders are an answer. I think they're a step, but they're a step that put people in danger, and that's the nature of how our system works. So I think to say that I mean the number of people
I have a lot of people ask about them. So the only other path is some kind of a civil order, which would be, exclusive occupancy of your house or something like that. And, those things you can get, but they take time.
Yes, they do.
So you have to, what the lawyer's power is to file a motion, set the motion for hearing in front of the judge. Then, and all the judges are very backed up. The judicial system is extremely backlogged. And so it takes a while to get a hearing.
Yes, it does.
And then once you get that hearing, newsflash, the judges don't always rule right away, which is really frustrating too. And so sometimes you're waiting weeks, months. I've even waited months for an order from that judge. So how is he or she getting away with this? Well, the only way you can rein in the behavior is by creating enough leverage in order to get that person to come to a table and potentially have a resolution with you, or get enough leverage that you can convince the judge to order things to go your way.
Right, which is hard. And again, in the populations I deal with, I deal with the people where things didn't go their way. And too many women who are beaten up or killed because the restraining order came that inflamed the violence. It's a nice idea, and law enforcement has more leverage. So it really opens up this whole issue of these are complicated issues. And in the bottom line, and I think one of the most painful things I've heard is the number of clients who've worked with me who've said, this person is a bad person. They should not be raising these kids. And again, it's usually not even the money piece. And they'll still be upset. I don't know how you expect me to do all this with this little bit of money, but how can you let this person half the time raise children? And I'm telling you, as somebody who's worked with these families, I have seen the majority of narcissists I've worked with got 50% custody.
Yeah, because
50% custody.
Yeah.
And let me tell you this, there's no happy ending to this. children are destroyed.
Well, here's what happens a lot of times in the negotiation for that, and especially in states where child support is tied to time sharing.
Yes.
Which a lot of states it is. Some states it's not, but most states it is.
Yeah.
And so what they do, especially if they're the moneyed spouse, is they go for time sharing because then they pay less in child support.
That's right.
And a lot of times they end up not taking it, which means that the non-moneyed spouse isn't getting the full amount of support,
and still with the kids.
They have the kids all the time.
Right. Which again, I understand what you're saying, that this is a right of the child, but I always advise clients, I say, anytime they try to blow you off, and blow off the kids. Like, they got the kids 50% of the time, so they didn't have to give you the money. That's why they fought for it. They didn't want the kids. They wanted the money. Okay?
But
now,
it's also, though, the facade of I got my kids 50% of the time. Because they don't want to tell the world that they didn't want their kids.
Right. They don't want to tell the world, but they don't want their kids.
No. But they want the show that they got 50%.
Right. So after the show is proven and they can walk around saying they want 50%, they're always trying to foist the kids on the other partner, 100%. To which I tell the other partner, who's usually the one I'm working with, take them. They're like, but this is unjust. I'm like, this whole thing is unjust. Didn't you say you want to be with your kids 100% of the time? Anytime they give them, take them, because the less time those kids are spending with the narcissistic parent, probably the healthier for your kids. Now, what does end up happening is that they're not often getting the requisite additional money that more time would take. They figure it out. But I'd say if you can get the time with your kids, get the time with your kids.
Okay, so a little strategy here as far as during a divorce. If the divorce is taking several months, which a lot of them do, then give the narcissist 50% of the time during the temporary period, because you will give them rope to hang themselves that way. Because then by the time you get to that final hearing or you get to the mediation, you've now kept a log, which I tell everybody, keep a log.
Oh, so do I. Yes.
So you've now kept a log that shows that this person showed up late, didn't take them, asked you to take them, blah, 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 because they can't help being themselves. They're not going to take the kids 50% of the time, even during that 9-month or 1-year period. You will have lots and lots of times that they asked to change the schedule. They showed up late, blah, blah, blah. And so now you have that leverage. Now you have the information that you need in order to push for the custody arrangement that you want.
Okay, it's a great point. I mean, again, we probably talk for 17 hours on this because we've seen it from both sides of it, and it is interesting, like, to watch that. I say exactly that is you have to keep the most detailed log. I said it's almost like you're keeping records and charts the way a physician would, like days, hours, you
I've
name
won
it.
entire cases on those.
Yes, I'm sure that's good, and I hope you heard that. She's won entire cases on those. You can't do this after the fact. You have to do this in real time. You're not going to be able to even construct it a week later. In real time, it has to become a daily practice that you're logging this stuff. It's difficult, it's painful, it's uncomfortable. You must do it. It's part of your healing, but it's also part of your strategy.
Just open a notes thing in your calendar or your phone, or use an app. There are apps just for taking notes for that. I mean, so just get into the habit of logging it real time. And now we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts. One of the things that I say that people should definitely do is document. And I know you tell your clients that too.
Thing. It's a good place to start, because I think it is, if it's the only do you do, you're in good shape. And I don't just use this document recommendation just in marriages and close relationships and divorces. I make it a strong suggestion in workplace issues, in other kinds of disputes you may be having, sometimes even in family issues. And it's interesting, my motivation for documentation, as you can imagine, it's to substantiate a legal argument, yes. But it's also to help with your sanity. Because sometimes people are like, no, maybe that didn't happen. I'm like, no, sweetie, in your journal on January 5th, it happened. You wrote it down. They're like, oh, yeah. So, the narcissistic relationships are absolutely impacted by euphoric recall. People strangely are able to remember the good stuff about these really bad relationships. The documentation sometimes becomes a place where you can say, yeah, no, this isn't healthy.
Well, it's that, and I would add to that the reason, another really good reason to document is that narcissists are pathological liars. So you will catch them in lies if you document. And I've won entire cases on people's notes. So, you know, and there's really no limit to how detailed you can be. It's really kind of just how meticulous you want to be, because, you know, if they're late for picking up the kids, if they're late for a payment on something, if they made a snide remark, if they wrote an email that was not reflective of a conversation and they tried to pawn it off as a conversation that you had, something like that, you know, just any little thing that just seems off to you, just take note of it. Because, you know, when you ask the question, how is he or she getting away with this, which you're going to ask that, and I always say there's no like divorce fairies that come out and stop people from doing things. So, you know, they won't get away with it if you end up in front of the judge and you have the proper documentation.
It is a, you know, I always say to people, you know, want to know how you know you're being gaslighted or in a relationship with a narcissist? I'll tell you. You, in arguments, you put text messages in front of them, you feel compelled to record conversations, and you feel the need to write long novels of emails to them to explain your feelings. You're doing that because you're not being heard and because you are being gaslighted so much that you have to show them this proof. This is taking this to another level and for a different reason. Again, it's to provide that substantiation. And it's not just about writing things down, it's about saving everything. You must save every text message. You must save every voicemail. You must save every email. Nothing can go. You're going to start to feel like a hoarder before this is done, but you're going to have to do it because sometimes it's just that one message. And one thing I do also strongly encourage people to do, print it all out. And there's actually apps out there that allow you to download all your text messages and print them all out. Create a printout because in case something blows up with your phone or your email server or something, then at least you have the hard evidence. It's got to have dates, times, all of that. Print it all out. You might even want to get into like a once a month cycle where you print everything out and put it someplace safe.
Yeah. A couple of things I want to just make a comment on what you just said. Number one is for your own sake too. Remember that every text and every email and every writing is a potential trial exhibit. So if you don't want to see it again,
Thank you.
Do not write it.
Yep, I love that.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, it will, if you don't want to see it again at a very inopportune time, meaning like in front of the judge, you know, where you're now having to explain and defend yourself, don't write it, don't send it.
But this becomes a great point of leverage because I'll tell you, nothing incenses a narcissist more than when you're not giving them equally long, bizarre text, like those long text messages that require you to click again to see the whole thing.
Right.
So what happens is if you give brief responses like, okay, let's talk later, they're going to just give you verbal diarrhea, which is great. So it's just, you get two for the price of one. You don't engage and put your stuff down where you don't want it to be, and you get them just sort of putting it all out there, which you now have for later. So that's good.
And the other point I wanted to make about what you said was, you know, you feel this need to show them and defend it, you know, prove to them that what they said was wrong, whatever. Don't do that.
No, I agree. Yep.
Don't do that. That's your leverage. Don't resist the urge to want to do that in the moment and prove to them. So listen, people, you're dealing with narcissists. Narcissists are not going to accept constructive feedback and make changes to their behavior based on their on your feedback and reflect on it and all of that stuff. It's not happening. So you can show them a text message that directly counteracts exactly what they just said, proves that they're lying, and somehow they will manipulate that away that it's not a lie. So, and even if it makes no sense whatsoever, I mean, sometimes they say things that make no sense whatsoever. But just resist that urge to want to show them the leverage. That would be a don't. You know, create your leverage. Do that, but don't give it away too early.
And it's a classic. It's a poker game. You would not ever sit in a casino and say, or a card game and say, "Look at my cards, everyone. Take a look, and now let's bet." So it's the same thing. It's just playing poker. What are some of the other big do's?
So I would say that you want to involve people that are going to be able to support you for sure. So you want to have a definite support system, but not people that are going to fan the flames and that sort of thing. So, have a support team around you. Get a really good lawyer who understands narcissism. We talked about that in the last video too. So if you haven't watched that video, you should go check it out.
Get a really good psychologist or therapist who understands narcissism as well. Like, I cannot stress this one enough. It's not because I'm trying to create business for my field, but this idea of a support system, a lot of the people around you cannot have this conversation. If they've never experienced it, I'm amazed at how many people, my friends even, read my books and they're like, this seems really interesting, but I don't get it. Now it doesn't bother me because it's like, okay, I get that you don't get it. But if I was going through a narcissistic relationship, I would feel very gaslighted and lost. So the beauty of therapy with a therapist who understands narcissism is they get it, and the kinds of support and feedback you'll get from them will not leave you feeling that you've lost your mind, but rather that you feel understood and supported. So I do think you need to choose those, and you have to choose where you have the conversations. Not everyone in your network can hear the conversation.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah. Anything else you'd say about that?
So the other thing is to use video for depositions.
Interesting.
A lot of people say, well, that's more expensive. Now we have to pay for a videographer. Well, okay, I'm going to tell you, you're already paying a court reporter. You're already paying your lawyer. You're going through this expense. Don't cheap out and not spend an extra couple $100 for the videographer, because what happens with the depositions is the court reporter can only take down, what is your name? My name is, John Adams or whatever. And then so when you see it on the page, it just looks like type.
I agree.
But what narcissists will do is they're going to try to rile you up. They're going to try to unnerve you. So they're going to make faces. They're going to make little things under their breath.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to try to do things that upset you.
Yep.
Things that they know are upsetting you. They're going to pass notes to their lawyer so that it makes it look like they're saying something about you, and you're wondering what's going on with that. And so, my normal listeners will know, like I just say, like, they're just less likely to act like a complete jackass if you have, because, that's how they can act, especially the grandiose ones and the malignant ones, right? So using video for deposition can definitely help to rein in their behavior.
Any other do's?
Let me see. I have gather as much supporting documentation on everything as possible. So you're going to want to, do your research. Do your research for your side. So one of the things that I say all the time is, when you're dealing with a narcissist, people tend to be so focused on defending against what that narcissist is doing that they forget to prepare their own case.
That's right. That's interesting.
And it's just like in football. If all you have is a great defense and you have no offense, then you have no case.
Right.
And if your only case is just tearing down the other person, you aren't going to get anything that you want.
So, and here's where it's interesting, because people who have been in narcissistic relationships who may not have already done the reading and gotten the education, they do what anyone would do if they feel they're being attacked or their reality is being doubted. They defend themselves. So after the life history of this relationship, where all they do is defend themselves, it can be often very difficult to turn that switch off.
Right.
And even in the work I do in working with survivors of narcissistic abuse, it's that don't defend yourself part. You have to have nerves of steel when someone is hurling all these bizarre, unfounded accusations at you, to nod at them and say, okay, and then walk away. And not engage it. And to me, I tell people, like, you know what? Forget all this meditation breathing. Like, this is your meditation. Like, toughening up and saying, I'm not going to respond to this. It takes more mindfulness. You could probably bend a spoon with the amount of mindfulness it takes to not defend to someone who is going after you. But now, after 10, 15, 20, 25 years of defending yourself against this person, it gets you nowhere.
And
it's time to stop.
And how you will feel better, and I actually asked somebody that I worked with in my work on coaching them through dealing with litigation with a narcissist. I said, how did you feel before I started working with you? And this happened to be a guy who was dealing with a narcissist ex-wife, and he said, helpless and abused.
Yep.
And, you know, but what we did was we turned it around by creating a plan, a game plan, a framework where he was actually going on the offensive.
Great. That's great.
And
I like
that's
that.
and that's something that's almost foreign sometimes to people when they're just so used to defending, that they can actually turn around and take the controls and actually have the narcissist begging them to resolve the case.
Right.
It can happen.
Any other thoughts on do's before we turn to the don'ts?
I think that's basically what, because we covered having a strong lawyer, which is really important. We covered being prepared. You know, the only other thing I really want to say about being prepared is don't make the mistake of going into a mediation or a settlement discussion just thinking you're just going to have a conversation. You make sure you have your leverage ready to go. Make sure you are ready to go as if you're going to court, because if you want to incentivize that person to settle and save thousands and thousands of dollars on going to court, if you go to court, you're basically throwing, you know, your future destiny to the judge. And the judge might have a bad day. The judge might see things differently than you do. Judges make mistakes all the time. It's going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars to go. So it's better if you can settle in mediation or in a settlement discussion, if you can.
Right.
But they're not going to unless you've given them the incentive to do that.
And I'm going to land it on one last do, which, and maybe it's my head as a psychologist, and I've said this, the people, all my YouTube friends, I know you're going to say, again, lady, you're going to say this, realistic expectations, radical acceptance. And the reason I say this as a do is that you almost have to get up with an intention like, okay, I got to keep it real. I know what's coming my way. Because when you do that, and again, the clients I do get to work with, you know, directly in my office, what we find is that we use our therapeutic sessions as a calibration. They're like, yeah, like, I feel like I'm slipping, and I'm like, what did you think was going to happen? And they're like, oh yeah. So it's so easy to want to put expectations about human behavior on this narcissistic person that are realistic. Like a normal person would do this. That's not what you're dealing with. Your expectations have to be skewed to what it is you're dealing with. Like I said, that's what I do with clients. That's, you know, therapists could do, some coaches do. I just, basically you drift back to like, but a normal person, I'm like, that's not what we're dealing with, darling. Let's get you right back here.
So expect that they will do all of these things.
And so when it happens, you almost chuckle to yourself, even when some of these emails come back. And sometimes I didn't have the clients send me the email and say, you're not, and I'd actually start laughing. I'm like, here we go. And it's like clockwork. I mean, it's literally like clockwork. So that clockwork can be sort of settling to us. So let's talk then about the don'ts, because I think in some ways the do's, while reassuring, the don'ts are where we can really steer people away from the rocks.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit in the previous video about boundaries. And so I would say don't let them cross your boundaries. You know, once you have set an expectation, or you've said, you know, we're only going to use this app to communicate with, or I have exclusive occupancy of the house. You're not allowed to come over unless you email me first and get my permission. You're not allowed to show up at my office unless you ask me first. You know, whatever expectations you've set, you have to stick to it and don't allow them to cross those boundaries, because that's something that's very typical of all the narcissists. They don't believe that boundaries apply to them.
Well, that's the entitlement. The entitlement is boundaries don't count. They apply to you. And in fact, many times, the narcissist will weaponize boundaries. They'll learn that fancy word through the whole process of going through this, and they'll say, you're crossing my boundary, but they will do it organically. They've always done it. And I think, like you said, you nailed it. And we talked about this in the other videos too, is this idea of not wanting to seem like the stick in the mud, like, oh, okay, what do you mean you can't meet at Starbucks? Are you so rigid? Well, you don't want to be rigid girl, or rigid guy. So I think that you have to remember boundaries are an incredibly important foundation because you're going to need them going forward. The divorce is just a process setting you up for the rest of your life. And as long as you particularly have minor children, this is going to be an issue. But even if you don't, I mean, one day these kids might get married or have a graduation and on and on and on. The more you can stick to those boundaries and be consistent about them, the more they will be easier to practice in the future.
So another don't is to get emotional or feel victimized or take things personally. I mean, it's all kind of the same boat there, just feeling, hurt when they lie about you or when they engage in their smear campaign, which is something they're probably going to do. Don't engage with that. We talked about that, but it's a really big don't, and it's really, really important that you try to look at it from a factual point of view, almost as if you're watching a movie of your life. Oh, I just see that he just said that to her, and then you're just going to say, okay, I see. Dr. Bill Eddy, who I've interviewed on my show, and so for my listeners, you can go back and watch the interviews that I have with him in video form or on my podcast. He talks about the BIFF method, which is brief, informative, friendly, and firm. But it's basically the whole premise of what he's saying is don't engage. Don't be pulled into the mud. Because as soon as you go off the handle, as soon as you're crying, screaming, yelling, fighting back, now you're in the mud with them. Now they know they have you.
And I think that this, and listen, we're all saying this same thing. Bill Eddy, Dr. Ramani, everybody is saying the same thing, okay? So it's that don't engage becomes this absolutely, critical pivot on this. I'm going to put my little bit of shrink wrap on this, which is, you are feeling, okay? You are feeling. So no one can tell you don't, to stop feeling. You will feel. It's how you communicate that feeling in a moment. So in many ways, what we're suggesting is actually quite superhuman. It's putting this strong tsunami of emotion behind a dam. And that it doesn't mean you'll never show it. You've got to find those places to show it. If you're in therapy of some kind, if you have trusted friends. Some people find other ways to sublimate it through creative approaches, through writing, through exercise, through spirituality. There's places that they take it. I even in my retreats come up with sort of ritualized exercises we do to help people let go of some of this, because some of it you have to express it or you will get sick. But it is this sense of one place you can actually get a lot of I don't know how to, self-possession in all of this. A relationship with a narcissist feels like you're constantly on a chaotic roller coaster that's about to go off the tracks all the time. And so you're always living in this fear, exhilaration, confusion kind of a situation. But what becomes interesting is if you can learn to be that serene self, and I often say you've got to channel this serenity. You're going to be calm, you're going to be tight, you're going to keep your answers brief. Once you practice that even just 1 or 2 times, you're going to recognize the power of it. And there's a power you feel in that moment. You may literally have to keep tears behind. You may go to the restroom and wipe them off. Anytime you do know you're going to be doing this kind of work, meeting with mediators, going to court, sitting in lawyers' offices, and having to encounter that narcissist again, keep your makeup kit and tissues and all that, because you may cry it all off in the bathroom. Put it all back on. Give yourself that out, but do not let them see the crack, because they will always exploit those beautiful vulnerabilities you have. But unfortunately, your vulnerabilities in their hands become weapons.
100%. And the more you do that, the more you slap that makeup back on and go back in there, the more powerful you'll feel, and the more confident you feel. That fake it till you make it really is true, actually. So my last don't is really just don't give in and don't give up, because they will try everything they can to get you to do that. I mean, so just be patient and persevere, keep going, because it will be worth it in the end.
And I'm going to give you one last don't from my side, which you know is at the absolute central core of the thesis of my book, Should I Stay or Should I Go, is don't maintain false hope. Your relationship got this far because you came at it from a place of hope and fear. Hope that it might get better, they might change after this deadline, after the baby gets older, after this. It never happened. Okay, so don't maintain that false hope. The other thing that kept you in place was fear. I don't want to be alone forever. What will other people think? I vowed to myself I wouldn't get divorced. I'm not going to be able to afford to live, and on and on and on. That powerful alchemy of hope and fear is what keeps these relationships going. But it's critical as you go through this process, you don't maintain false hope. Part of your attorney's job is that you don't get to maintain that false hope. If you walk into your attorney's office and say, hey, I want everything and I want 100% custody, it's your attorney's job saying, sweetie, I mean, I'll get you what I can, but you ain't getting that.
If you have an attorney that says, oh, I'll get you 100% of his paycheck for alimony and 100% custody, keep going.
Yeah, so
Find a different lawyer.
So you don't want to get those false hopes, maintained, and people, I can't begin to tell you how many people out there said, I got this, and once the judge sees what a jerk he is, they're going to give me everything. And then they go and sit in an attorney's office, and the attorney says, here's what we're looking at, and the person will say, you mean that the judge is potentially going to let them have the kids half the time? They said, potentially, you can count on it. And for a lot of people, they said, and they're completely shattered. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, that is such a good point. So I talk about divorce law versus divorce justice. Those are my little words for it. So divorce law is what's going to happen, and that's how it just gets applied. The judges, I mean, in mediation, you might be able to veer off from the law a little bit, but if you end up in front of a judge, the judge's job, they're sworn to apply the law. That's all they can do. That is all they can do. If they don't apply the law, they'll get appealed. They won't get realected. All kinds of bad things start to happen to them. Judges get graded on how many times they get appealed. So, they're not going to do anything other than apply the law. And so, these people have these notions that people are going to go in and the heavens are going to open.
Well, TV
and
justice.
they're going to see what a horrible person he's been to me, and he's going to give me everything. That is not going to happen. It's just not. So, divorce justice doesn't happen. And the gavels are not magic wands. They can't make the other person be a good person. They can't make them into a good dad. They can't make them into having a conscience. They can't make them care. There's only so much they can order them to do.
And remember, and this is one thing I got into one of my YouTube videos you may want to check out, narcissism isn't against the law. It feels like it should be against the law, but it's not against the law. So even if that judge, and you may never hear it from her or him, might be thinking, oh my God, this guy is such a jerk. That is not against the law. And at the end of the day, as Rebecca's saying, that is their job, to see through the law. They deliver that. And listen, I've heard people hear things as harsh from judges as saying, you chose this person. It's not the job of this court to correct your bad decision making. And it's devastating for people to hear. It's devastating. It really is. Sadly, yes, there may be a grain of truth to it. However, and this is in my big fantasy Dr. Ramani world, is all of what we're talking about, I wish people could see this before they even really start dating and getting married.
So
I mean, that to me, my mission is to teach people to be better gatekeepers. So you don't sit in a courtroom one day and you think about the 10,000 red flags you ignored to get you to that day
or whatever.
And then when the judge finally says to you, like, you made this choice, I know that, and it is not the job of the court to fix that mess. It really isn't.
No.
But hopefully they could get it righter than they do, because they often don't get it right, frankly. And then in the next issue being that it isn't against the law. And I think it's heartbreaking. I wish it was, and if I ran the world it would be, but I don't.
Yeah. So and it's not against being, you can have narcissistic parents too.
Absolutely.
And it's not grounds for taking custody from them.
It's really
so not. Unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
So don't give in and don't give up. And don't have false hope.
Yeah.